Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the November 16th edition of Office Hours. My name is Dr. Tisa Silver-Kennedy, and I thank you so much for joining me this evening. It has been quite an eventful time in the world of student loans, so we have a lot to talk about this evening. We have many questions that have come in from our community, and I will do my best to answer those questions for you this evening. So let's get into this evening's presentation. For a quick agenda, I always start off office hours with a bit about the Maryland Center for Collegiate Financial Wellness and a description specifically of office hours, and then we'll dive right into questions from our community. So, about the center, the Maryland Center for Collegiate Financial Wellness was founded in the summer of 2021 with the goal to help students and their families build financial life skills and empowering them to thrive. We have a vision for all of Maryland's college and career students, and that's that they are able to achieve these 6 pillars of collegiate financial wellness. 1 being creditworthy, 2 being ready, 3 being resilient, 4th being empowered, 5th being successful, and 6th and finally being able to thrive. And now for a brief description of Office Hours. Office Hours is our free semi-monthly virtual student loan clinic that provides borrowers with a trusted venue to help them navigate student loans and prepare for financial success beyond repayment. And every time we have this session, I have to put the disclaimer out there that Office Hours is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as financial or legal advice. The information that we give is from the Department of Education, because that's the lender for most borrowers that we work with. And we also use some other trusted resources, and we try to give you the most up-to-date information we have while keeping things accurate. But as you've seen in recent weeks, the student loan space is rapidly changing. So like I said, we'll do our best to provide you with information to help you make solid decisions. But remember, ultimately, you are responsible for those decisions. So now that that's out of the way, let's get into the questions for this evening. And before I read this question, I just wanted to say, if you're joining me this evening on Facebook, feel free to leave a question in the comments. I'll check those from time to make sure that I'm answering those. And if you're joining me on Zoom, feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A, and I will look at those periodically and do my best to answer those questions for you. So let's get into our first question from the community. First question is, I applied for cancellation back in October. Now the website says that relief is blocked. What is going on? Am I going to go back into repayment? So this is a loaded question, isn't it? It has 2 parts. The first one is what's happening. The second one is about going back into repayment. I want to actually touch on the repayment piece of this first, just to share with everyone that the broad cancellation that was expected, that was up to $20,000 per most federal student loan borrowers. For millions of people, that relief would have meant that their entire federal student loan balance would have been wiped out. And for someone who completed the application in October, they were expected to see that relief processed within 6 weeks. So by the end of the year, they would have a student loan balance of 0. So the expectation for millions of people, that was before the end of the year, they would have a 0 balance. And when repayment is set to resume after the end of this year, that wouldn't apply to them because their loans have been wiped out. But now that cancellation has been blocked, that has basically put their plans to not re-enter repayment on ice. So let's go a little bit deeper with the answer to this question. I just wanted to give you a timeline of the happenings with this broad cancellation program, the Biden-Harris Student Debt Relief Plan. So the plan was announced on August the 24th, and on October 17th, the application formally opened through studentaid.gov. There were several lawsuits that were filed after that application was opened, and some of those lawsuits were dismissed, but others worked their way up to higher courts. And on November the 10th, the relief plan was blocked by a judge in Texas. As a result of that blockage, a couple of things are happening. The first one is that no new applications are being accepted. So if you go to studentaid.gov, you'll still see a note about the cancellation plan, but you'll see an announcement there that the cancellation has been blocked. So no new applications are currently being accepted. The other piece of this is that for the millions of people, I believe the estimate was around 26 million people. For the 26 million or so people who submitted an application, those requests for cancellation will not be processed because the relief plan has been blocked. So no new applications are being accepted, and there's not going to be any movement as far as cancellation is concerned on the applications for borrowers who've already submitted that application. So things are just on hold right now. And so many people want to know what's going to happen next. And I'm watching just like you are. The thing with the lawsuits is that some have been dismissed. Others have had rulings and been appealed. The Department of Justice has appealed one of the most recent rulings. So the administration is pushing forward using all legal channels available to make the plan go through. But for right now, things are blocked and we just have to stay tuned. If you are interested in receiving the most timely updates, I would strongly encourage you to visit the Department of Education and subscribe. And when you visit www.ed.gov/subscriptions, there's an option there that you can select for student loan news. And if you subscribe there, you'll receive updates. And I'm sure that if there is any movement on the cancellation plan, that you will be advised as soon as those developments take place. So we're all just kind of, holding on, waiting to see what happens as this relief plan plays out in court. As a refresher, for those of you who are not familiar with the specifics of the Biden-Harris student debt relief plan, the plan actually had 3 elements. The first element was the extension of the CARES Act forbearance. Since March 13th of 2020, most of us student loan borrowers have been in a forbearance, but this is a special forbearance in that interest has not been accruing on our loans, in addition to the fact that payments have not been required. So when this plan was announced, the first piece of it was to extend that forbearance until the end of this year, so until December 31st of 2022. The second piece of the plan was that broad cancellation of up to $20,000 per borrower. The third piece of the relief plan package was the creation of a new income-driven repayment plan that would make monthly payments more affordable. But the piece that most people have focused in on is the cancellation benefit of up to $20,000 per borrower. So I just wanted to review the terms and how to determine if you are eligible for relief through this plan, and if you are eligible, at what level of eligibility you could count on if this plan moves forward. So there's more information about this, of course, at studentaid.gov. I just like to think of things kind of in a checklist format, so it helps me to know which questions to ask to drill down on eligibility. So the first question is, are your loans federally held? To determine if your loans are federally held, you can visit studentaid.gov. And when you look at your servicers, you want to look to see if you see Department of Ed in front of the name of the servicer. If you see Department of Ed in front of the servicer's name, then that means your loans are indeed federally held. The next question is, were your loans originally dispersed before June 30th of 2022? And again, you can go to studentaid.gov, take a look at the My Aid section, and when you view the loan breakdown, you can get a history of every federal student loan that you've ever taken out, along with their disbursement dates. So if you have original loans that were dispersed before June 30th of 2022, then your loans could qualify for relief through this plan, provided that you meet the other criteria. Also, if you consolidated perhaps previously ineligible loans, but you did so on September 28th or earlier of this year, then when reviewing this piece of the application, they will look at the disbursement dates on the original loans that went into the consolidation loan. Unfortunately, the option for certain FFEL borrowers to consolidate and gain eligibility for this program was revoked on September the 29th. So you can check those disbursement dates again at studentaid.gov by viewing the loan breakdown section. So if you answered yes to those first 2 questions, let's go to question number 3. This is about the income cap. This plan is meant to benefit people who have a 2020 or 2021 adjusted gross income under $125,000 for borrowers who file as single taxpayers, or for married borrowers who file separately. For borrowers who are married and filing jointly or file as head of household, that income cap raises to $250,000, and it's for either year, 2020 or 2021. To verify that information, you want to look at your personal income tax return. That's Form 1040, line 11. Now, if you can answer yes to all three of those questions, then you should be eligible for up to $10,000 worth of relief through this plan. I say up to $10,000 because if your balance is less than $10,000, then your relief would be for the same amount as your balance. If let's say your balance is $9,990, that balance would be wiped away. You would not receive the additional $10 difference between the $10,000 limit and the balance that you owed. So that's why it says up to $10,000. Now, the next layer of relief really applies to Pell Grant recipients. So there are two additional questions to ask. The first one is the balance on your loans borrowed for your own education greater than $10,000? The reason this question is so specific about whose education the loans were borrowed for is because the cap for people who have Parent Plus loans only is $10,000, regardless of whether they received a Pell Grant. So $10,000 is the ceiling for parents. But if you have Parent Plus loans that you took out for your child's education, and you have student loans that you took out for your own education, as long as the balance for your loans taken out for your own education is greater than $10,000 and you received a Pell Grant, then you could be eligible for up to $20,000. As for verifying the answers to both of these final questions, of course, the answers are at studentaid.gov. Quick note about Pell Grant recipients. I've heard from some people that received Pell Grants prior to, I believe, 1994, and they weren't able to see the Pell Grant history within studentaid.gov. And there's a note actually on studentaid.gov that mentions this. If you received a Pell Grant prior to 1994, then it's possible that the record is not visible when you log into studentaid.gov, but the Office of Federal Student Aid has assured everyone that even if it's not visible on studentaid.gov, they will still have record of your Pell Grant. So if you went to school in the 90s and received a Pell Grant and you don't see it listed on studentaid.gov, do not worry. There should be a record of that Pell Grant held within the Office of Federal Student Aid's records. So if you answer yes to all of these questions, then under the Biden-Harris Student Debt Relief Plan, you should be eligible for up to $20,000 worth of relief. Again, if your balance is less than $20,000, then should this plan move forward, your entire balance could be wiped away. If you owe more than $20,000, then you would see a reduction in the amount of your debt by $20,000, and you'd be responsible for repaying the rest. As of the date of this session today, November 16th, 2022, the application for student debt relief is not available and the program has been temporarily blocked. So I will definitely be keeping an eye on things to see if this changes, and if so, when we can expect to see this relief processed. Originally, the Department of Education said that if a person filed an application before November 15th of this year, then they could expect to see their balance reduced by the end of the year. That's why the timing of this is really putting a lot of people into an uncertain spot, because they completed the application in October, expecting to see that relief by early December or perhaps the end of the year. And for millions of people, this would have meant that repayment was over forever. And now that's on pause. So there are millions of people who now we're expecting will go back into repayment unless something changes with the CARES Act forbearance that is set to expire on December 31st of this year. So a lot going on in a very short period of time. All right, I'm going to take a pause quickly to look at comments on Facebook. And there are none, and I see the Q&A is empty right now. So I'm going to roll on to the next question, which is, I have worked for a qualifying employer for 20 plus years. I got a letter that I'm not eligible for PSLF. Why? Well, sometimes those PSLF letters can be a bit confusing. So I wanted to share with you all some common experiences from borrowers that I have worked with about what happens after they apply for PSLF, as well as what happens after they consolidate. The letters can be particularly confusing when a person has consolidated and applied for PSLF, and here's why. So for many people, I've heard that the first letter that they receive with a qualifying payment count features a count that is unusually low. A qualifying payment count is the number of months that the servicer has counted for you as qualifying toward the 120 that you need to achieve that ultimate benefit of public service loan forgiveness. So there are two pieces of the count. One count is eligible payments. The other count is qualifying payments. The qualifying payments are the ones that make a difference. And the difference between an eligible payment and a qualifying payment is that a qualifying payment has verified public service employment attached to it. So if you have been working in a public service career for many, many years, and you just consolidated and applied for PSLF, your first qualifying payment number could be in the single digits. And if you are in this situation, I just want to tell you, don't freak out or try not to freak out. It's okay. This seems to be the typical borrower experience that many people have observed over the past several months. That count is unusually low because the count only reflects the months in repayment on the most recent loan. So if you just consolidated, the consolidation loan is your most recent loan. In a consolidation, what happens is your existing older loans are paid off and a new loan is originated. So when the servicer conducts that first count, they're looking at the most recent loan on the books, which is the consolidation loan. So I've heard back from plenty of people who have said, you know, I've worked in public service for 15 years, but they sent me this count back that says I have 3 qualifying payments. What is this? And they're just really confused because they know they have a lengthy history of public service employment. But since the first count is only looking at the consolidation loan, it makes sense that you would receive a qualifying payment count that is unusually low. The prior servicer at least has said that after consolidation, people may temporarily have their payment count reset to 0, but they've assured everyone that that is temporary. Once the second review is conducted, you'll see that your qualifying payment count is going to begin to reflect all of the months that are in repayment along with that qualifying employment. So the first letter, the consensus that I've heard from many people is after I read the first letter, I thought I was rejected. I thought I was done. And like I said, that's a common experience, but usually the next letter, which comes, for some people, it's come a few weeks later. For some people, it takes a bit longer. The next count actually shows all the months in repayment and begins to reflect the employment history. There's some people I've seen that even though they worked for one employer for maybe 10, 15 years, the months of repayment are, the employment is certified kind of in spurts. So I don't know what the process is for those reviews, but just the bottom line here is try not to be alarmed if you see a count that looks unusually low and you know that you've done everything that you were supposed to do. If you consolidated those older types of ineligible loans and you completed the PSLF application to verify your employment and you can confirm that it's been received by MOHELA, then you have done your part. Now it's the servicer's turn to review all of those records and to update your qualifying payment count. But the process of getting a qualifying payment count that is accurate can take months. So just hang in there, be patient. So once, if you've consolidated, once your loan lands with MOHELA, you should be able to set up an online user account for their website. And when you log into your website, you will see a PSLF option on the navigation bar. Once that PSLF section is available for you to view fully, you'll be able to see the actual PSLF applications that you previously submitted. You can see the dates. You can see the status, if it was received or processed. You can also look at what's called the payment tracker, and the payment tracker will allow you to see 1 month at a time for every loan, if there was a payment and if employment has been certified to match that payment. So the payment tracker, when you are able to see that level of detail, it really helps you get a better grasp of where you stand relative to the 120. And if your payment count looks unusually low, Once you can see the payment tracker, you might see that your employment has been certified at all. And that could be the reason why the payment is so low. So the bottom line here is that the first letter usually makes people feel like they're rejected, but better news usually comes later after the employment is fully certified and the entire repayment history of the older loans has been reviewed. So do not be alarmed if you receive one of those letters and you know you have the work experience and you know you've had loans for a long time. Just know that this is the process that borrowers have been experiencing for the past several months. Okay, so just to reiterate, the initial letter might say that you are not eligible for PSLF, but this does not mean that you will always be ineligible. Even though some people interpret it that way, that's not necessarily what it means. What it probably means is that as of the time that that letter was sent, your qualifying payment count had not reached 120 yet. And since your qualifying payment count had not reached 120, you are currently eligible for that ultimate benefit of having the debt forgiven tax-free, because that benefit only comes after you reached 120. So even if the letter says, you're not eligible, you've been rejected, it just means that at that point in time, you don't meet the criteria to have the debt forgiven right away. It could be a matter of your account needing to be updated, or perhaps you need to work and make payments for another couple of years. Either way, that first letter I don't want to say for everybody, but for many, many people that I have dealt with, that initial letter, regardless of where they stand on the timeline, above or below 120, that initial letter has always read like a reject. Okay, so keep that in mind when you are opening the mail from MOHELA. All right, so I know I shared a lot about uncertainty and how this process unfolds with the letters, but I did receive some good news this morning, and the screenshot that you're seeing here is actually from a borrower who took a look at the payment tracker inside of their MOHELA online account and saw that their qualifying payment count has now risen to 121, which is, of course, over the threshold of 120 that's necessary for them to have their balance forgiven tax-free. So whenever I get these messages, I'm just so happy because this means that another person who did what they were supposed to do, they've dedicated their career to public service, and finally they're able to reap the benefit of public service loan forgiveness. So I'm very happy and celebrating for this person who is going to have more than $70,000 canceled through PSLF. As for the timeline for this person, this is a borrower who had FFEL loans. And prior to the limited waiver that started in October 2021, FFEL loans were not eligible for public service loan forgiveness. So the only way to get on track for public service loan forgiveness prior to the waiver would have been to consolidate the FFEL loans and start over from payment one. So the person would have had to work and make payments for another 120 months and then apply again to have the remaining balance forgiven tax-free. Now, that wasn't necessarily attractive because FFEL loans are an older variety of loans. So for some people who've been in repayment for years and years, the thought of consolidating and starting over with a brand new loan, it's just not appealing. Sometimes it creates anxiety because things are changing, and there's a fear that maybe the program won't work out for them. There's a lot of stuff going on under the surface when it comes to this decision about whether to consolidate. So after the waiver went into effect, this person consolidated right away, November of 2021. By the spring of 2022, I think it was around March or April, they have received word that their qualifying payment count was 113. So with that figure, there was also an expected PSLF date of September. I'm sorry, I made a typo there. It's September 2022, not September 2021. So as for everyone with PSLF, once you know the expected PSLF eligibility date, mark it on the calendar. And as soon as that month arrives and you are ready to make that 120th payment, also make sure that you're submitting another PSLF application to update your employment. So in September 2022, the borrower filed a new PSLF application. And remember, the PSLF application is just an employment certification. So all it does is it updates the employment information to make sure that the borrower is still working for a public service employer. So that form is sent September 2022, and November of 2022, the payment count had been updated to 121. So the count has been updated. The balance has not been cleared yet. That can take some more time, but the count is there. This person has finally reached that 120 mark, and I'm just very excited for the possibilities that await them now that this student loan debt is about to be cleared. All right, I'm going to take a pause again to see if we have any comments. And Q&A is empty for now, so I will just keep moving. All right, our next question. This is one I get quite often. It's, I don't work for a qualifying PSLF employer. What about cancellation through IDR? Public service loan forgiveness has just been the topic of the year. Ever since the waiver was announced in October 2021, that is by far what I've been talking about the most. But there is probably never an event where there is no one who asks, what about me? I don't work in public service. Is there a path to cancellation for me anyway? And unfortunately, I haven't been able to share much with them. And now I have something concrete that could result in some action very soon. So let's talk about cancellation through IDR. IDR stands for income-driven repayment plans. Income-driven repayment plans differ from balance-driven repayment plans in that balance-driven repayment plans calculate the monthly payment based on solely the borrower's balance. So whatever it is you owe, you can pick the term if you want to pay over 10 years or 25 years, and you can have fixed payments for that period, or graduated payments, which are payments that start low and increase in increments like every 2 years. Income-driven repayment plans are different in that it's not based on the balance that a person owes. The payment would be based on their household characteristics, including their adjusted gross income, state of residence, tax filing status, and family size. So the idea is every year, or in the event of an income change, particularly a shock to income, a person would update this information with their loan servicer. The loan servicer would use that information to calculate a new monthly payment. And then the person would make that payment every month for the next year. And then they would recertify that information again, the AGI and the household characteristics. Now, if they're enrolled in the income-driven plans, there is cancellation that has, it's supposed to be available through income-driven repayment plans. I say that it was supposed to be available because it just hasn't panned out that way for many people. But these IDR plans offer cancellation after 20 or 25 years, depending on what plan the borrower is enrolled in and what types of loans the borrower has. So there are 4 income-driven repayment plans. There's income-based repayment, which is known as IBR. There's income contingent repayment, which is known as ICR. Pay-as-you-earn, which a lot of people just call pay or payee. And then there's revised pay-as-you-earn, which many people call repay. So with each of these plans, there is supposed to be a cancellation option at the end of 20 or 25 years, and none of these plans require a person to work in a certain type of industry or within public service to get this benefit. So with income-based repayment, the cancellation should come after 20 years of being in the income-based repayment plan for people who are deemed as new borrowers or borrowers for the first time after July 1st of 2014. People who were borrowers prior to that, the cancellation is supposed to come after 25 years. With the income contingent repayment plan, this plan is the only plan that is available to people who have Parent Plus loans and want to pursue PSLF or cancellation through an income-driven repayment plan. So for the income contingent repayment plan, which is also known as ICR, The cancellation is supposed to come after 25 years of being enrolled in a plan and making payments. With pay as you earn, cancellation is set to come after 20 years of payments. And revised pay as you earn makes a distinction between undergraduate loans and graduate school loans. So if all the loans that you are repaying under the revised pay as you earn plan are for undergraduate study, then you could receive cancellation after 20 years. But if any of the loans that you're repaying under the plan are for graduate or professional study, then that timeline jumps up to 25 years. So this is the pathway to cancellation for people who do not work in public service, because as I mentioned before, it hasn't panned out for many people. So the Department of Education is engaged in another one-time action, which is called the IDR Adjustment, or some people might refer to it as the IDR waiver. So for this, I wanted to be very clear in sharing the information straight from the Department of Education. So this is a quote straight from FSA's website. The Department of Education is conducting a one-time revision of IDR payment counters to address past inaccuracies, including automatically discharging loans for eligible borrowers and permanently fixing IDR payment counting by reforming the Department of Education's IDR tracking procedures going forward. The translation is basically, there are some flaws with the existing system of counting payments toward IDR. So that IDR count hasn't been working. In some cases, servicers weren't counting the number of payments that a person had made. So there was no way to know if someone had reached the 20 or 25 year mark because the counts just weren't happening. So the Department of Education is taking steps to give everyone a count and then to make sure that going forward, payments are counted toward cancellation under IDR. Now, here's another layer of interesting developments. So with this IDR adjustment, there's a lot of latitude for what can count as a qualifying payment. And these rules will look familiar to many of you because they're similar to the rules of the limited PSLF waiver that recently expired. So time that can count toward IDR forgiveness or IDR cancellation include, number one, any months in which you had time in a repayment status, regardless of the payments made, the loan type, or repayment plan. So you didn't have to be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan for those months to count toward cancellation through IDR. They're not actually looking at the payments, they're looking at the repayment status of the loans, and give you a little bit more detail about what that repayment status means. So forbearances are typically periods that do not count toward PSLF qualifying payments or IDR payments because no payments being made. But there have been some instances where people were enrolled in forbearances longer than the rules allowed them to be. So some people have forbearances that were 12 or more consecutive months, or forbearances that were 36 or more cumulative months. And if you are one of those people, then those months can count toward forgiveness through IDR or for PSLF. I should say, and PSLF. Also, deferments typically don't count toward PSLF or IDR forgiveness. In this scenario, months spent in deferment prior to 2013 will count, with the exception of in-school deferments. With an in-school deferment, if you were enrolled in school at least half-time with a half-time credit load, then your loans are usually placed into an in-school deferment automatically. That means payments are not required. So since payments were not required because you were in school, those months of deferment won't count, but other months spent in deferment prior to 2013 can count toward forgiveness via IDR and PSLF. Finally, any time in repayment prior to consolidation on consolidated loans. So if you recently consolidated your loan, I know we talked about the unusually low qualifying payment count that comes along with consolidation loans right after you consolidate and apply for PSLF. That's because the most recent loan is the one that they're looking at first. But there's repayment history prior to consolidation, because the loans that you consolidated had history, and those payments will be evaluated to see if the repayment statuses are acceptable to count toward forgiveness through IDR. So very similar circumstances to the limited PSLF waiver. All right, as a result, any borrower with loans that have accumulated time in repayment of at least 20 or 25 years, depending on the plan, will see automatic forgiveness, even if you are not currently on an IDR plan. That statement right there is huge. There are many people who have been in repayment for 20, 25 years, and looking at their balances, they still probably got another 15 or 20 years to go. But because of this adjustment, any borrower with loans that have accumulated time in repayment of at least 20 or 25 years will see automatic forgiveness. And from looking on the Department of Education's website, that would begin to happen this month. So the adjustment is ongoing. Also, borrowers who have commercially managed FFEL loans, FFEL, Perkins Health Education Assistant Loan Program loans, or any other non-direct loans should apply for a direct consolidation loan by May 1st of 2023 to get the full benefits of the one-time account adjustment. So if your loans are not direct and they're commercially managed and you would like to take advantage of the possibility of cancellation through IDR, you have until May 1st of 2023 to consolidate your loans to get the full benefits. Just want to reiterate this here. If you have those commercially managed loans, you have to consolidate by May 1st. Also, if you're in default, you could still benefit from cancellation through the IDR adjustment by getting out of default prior to July of 2023. The Department of Education has also embarked upon something called the Fresh Start Initiative, which is designed to help borrowers who are in default get out of default, and once repayment resumes, have some of those negative consequences of default cleared from their records until they're officially out of default. Student loan default means that you haven't made a payment for at least 270 days, and the consequences of default are far-reaching. They include things like having your transcript withheld, which some people think might not be a big deal, but if you're applying for a job and the job requires a transcript and you can't produce one, then you might not be able to get that job. Also, you can be sued, your wages can be garnished, your tax refund and benefits can be seized. It's damaging to your credit. There are just several consequences that are far-reaching and basically make a lot of your other financial events much more costly or much more difficult. So if you're in default, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to the Department of Education, their default resolution group, contact them and make arrangements to get yourself out of default so that those loans can be restored to a good standing, and perhaps you can benefit from this one-time IDR adjustment. All right. Just a quick note about what types of loans you have, because some people say, well, what is a commercially held loan? What difference does that make? So your loan could be held by the Department of Education, or it could be commercially held, but where to find the difference is within studentaid.gov. If you log into studentaid.gov, you can take a look at your loan servicers, and if the loan is held by the Department of Education, you'll see Department of Ed listed before the servicer. If the loan is in default but held by the Department of Education, you'll see Default Management Collection System. Both of those terms, Department of Ed and Default Management Collection System, lets you know that the loans are held by the Department of Education. If they're not held by the Department of Education, that means that they are commercially held loans. So to take advantage of the IDR adjustment, if you want to take advantage of this IDR adjustment and you have those commercially held loans, you would need to consolidate them before May 1st of 2023. All right, so let's take a look at the next question. Did the PSLF waiver get extended? That limited PSLF waiver. The limited PSLF waiver did not get extended. It expired on October 31st of 2022 as originally scheduled. Even though the waiver was not extended, as you just saw, a lot of the conditions that were a part of the waiver are included in that IDR account adjustment. So there are provisions similar to the waiver that are ongoing, even though the waiver itself did expire on October 31st. And I just wanted to give you a recap of what made the waiver so different. And I think this is still relevant because there are a lot of people who applied through the waiver and are wondering what their payment count is going to look like. And I think this will help them grasp what to expect, since those applications that were submitted before the waiver deadline on October 31st. Those applications are still being evaluated under the rules of the waiver. So the original rules of PSLF, borrowers had to make 120 qualifying payments. Those payments had to be made on direct loans only. Those payments had to be made while the borrower was enrolled in a qualifying repayment plan. The borrower also had to work for a qualifying employer as a direct full-time employee, or you could have multiple part-time jobs for qualifying employers as long as the hours come up to at least an average of 30 hours worked per week. Also, the borrower had to remain in that type of qualifying employment at the time that they applied for PSLF and at the time that their application for PSLF was approved. In the middle, we have the rules for the temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness program. Notice that the only requirement that was stricken from the original rules was the requirement that the borrower had to be enrolled in a qualifying repayment plan. Even though that particular requirement was stricken, there's still some other fine print about the amount of the payments that the borrowers were making in the 12 months before they applied for public service loan forgiveness. So TEPSLF, which is temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness, had a rejection rate that was, I think, equally as high as a rejection rate for PSLF under the original rules. That rejection rate was about 98%. So then came the limited waiver announced on October 6th of 2021. You can take a look at the screen and see that the waiver took the original requirements of PSLF, there were 5 of them, and reduced it to 2. Those 2 remaining requirements were, number 1, instead of having to make 120 monthly payments, a borrower had to have 120 periods of repayment. So this is very similar language to that IDR account adjustment. We're looking at periods of repayment. So it's repayment status, not the actual payment that matters. If a loan was in repayment, in certain types of forbearances, in deferment before 2013, with the exception of in-school deferments, then those periods of repayment could count toward PSLF as long as the person had qualifying employment. The only other condition of the limited PSLF waiver was qualifying employment. Now, of course, borrowers who had those older previously ineligible loans had to take the action of consolidating by October 31st to gain access to the benefits of the limited PSLF waiver. But we went from having 5 program requirements down to having 2 program requirements. And as a result, so many more people have been able to have their debt forgiven through PSLF. So I wanted to give you a quick update on the state of Maryland. So as of the end of September 2022, 6,750 Maryland residents have had a total of $462.7 million forgiven through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And the bulk of these forgiven debts definitely came from the limited PSLF waiver that went into effect in October of 2021. I expect that number will rise because there are many more people who had applications in the pipeline and made sure that they filed those applications before October 31st to get as much credit as possible toward the 120 payments that are necessary to achieve loan forgiveness through PSLF. So go Maryland. All right, next question. Is the payment pause going to be extended? The payment pause is set to expire December 31st of 2022. As of right now, that's what I know. It's set to end on December 31st of 2022. And for many people, that means that their first payment since early 2020 is likely to be due in late January of 2023. Now, I must say that given the developments with the Biden-Harris Student Debt Relief Plan being blocked, a lot of people are speaking up about extending the payment pause, and with good reason, because had this student debt relief plan gone through, millions of people would have had a zero balance at the time that this payment pause is set to end on December 31st, 2022. But since the plan has been blocked, those people will now be expected to resume payments. And with that being about 6 weeks away, the end of the pause, and still not knowing what's going to happen with that broad cancellation plan, a lot of people, including myself, have been advocating for that payment pause to be extended. So we'll see what happens. Stay tuned for updates. Lots of changes going on in the student loan space, as I said at the beginning of this office hours session, and I expect that there will be more to come. All right, so I wanted to share some resources with you all about public service loan forgiveness, income-driven repayment, and repayment in general. Of course, the best place to go is studentaid.gov, because if you have federal student loans, then the Department of Education is your lender. So they know the most about this. You can find them online at studentaid.gov, and if you log in, you can look at your loans. You can use the PSLF help tool to apply for PSLF, because even though the limited PSLF waiver has expired, the public service loan forgiveness program still remains. Also, if you need to consolidate your loan to gain benefits for PSLF or for cancellation via IDR, you can complete that application online at studentaid.gov as well. Next is the Maryland Center for Collegiate Financial Wellness. We built an online resource page dedicated to public service loan forgiveness and the limited PSLF waiver. And as I mentioned, even though the waiver has expired, public service loan forgiveness remains, and we would like for as many people who are eligible to get into the pipeline as possible. You can visit us online at mccfw.org, and if you want to learn more about how the waiver has impacted Maryland, take a look at the MD TAPS page, and MD TAPS stands for Maryland Telepublic Servant. In addition, the Institute of Student Loan Advisors website is freestudentloanadvice.org. The founder of that organization also created a Reddit mega thread called the PSLF mega thread, which has tons of information about public service loan forgiveness, the limited waiver, the recently announced IDR account adjustment, and general student loan advice. I highly recommend visiting that if you have applied for benefits through public service loan forgiveness, or you want to know more about the application experience for other borrowers. Please do check out that mega thread, because you'll see people who are sharing in real time what they're experiencing, and also in great detail. The last resource that I wanted to share with you, well, the next to last resource I wanted to share with you is the Student Borrower Protection Center. Their website is cancelmystudentdebt.org. You can find plenty of information there about pathways to cancellation, the broad relief program, public service loan forgiveness, the IDR account adjustment, and you can view the steps that you would need to take to get the maximum benefit from each of these programs. The other resources I wanted to share with you before I wrap up are resources around accountability. There are many people who feel the need to file complaints because of things like missing payment records or misapplied payments, and they want to know, how can I get this resolved? So there are a few options. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is a great place to submit your complaints. I've complained to them and gotten results myself. So you can visit them online at consumerfinance.gov. They also have plenty of informational resources on student loans there. Also, the Department of Education's Ombudsman. There are, if you go to the Department of Education's website and take a look at the Ombudsman's page, you're going to see kind of like it's not a filter, but maybe a decision tree that shows you whether the Department of Education Ombudsman is the right office for you to contact for your concern. But for concerns related to public service loan forgiveness, you can submit what's called a reconsideration request if you feel that the qualifying payment count that you've received is unusually low. Now, I caution you with that, with submitting that reconsideration request too early. It's not necessarily something, it's not something that would harm your application at all. But if you're a person who consolidated recently and you got that first letter, you don't need to file a reconsideration request after that first letter, because the first letter, remember, is the one that reflects the most recent loan. So it's quite possible that your first payment count looks really low because you just consolidated, not because the servicer is trying to deny you credit for prior months of repayment history and employment history. But if you've been through all of that and you received the first letter, the second letter, and the count still doesn't look right, then submit a reconsideration request to have those records reviewed. Next is the Maryland Student Loan Ombudsman. The state of Maryland has a student loan ombudsman that can help borrowers with specific problems, such as failure by the servicer to communicate with the borrower, errors in crediting principal and interest payments, misapplied payments, inaccurate interest rate calculations, billing errors, loan consolidations or modifications errors, and or inappropriate collection activity or tactics. So you have several options if you'd like to formally complain about your servicer. But before you go this route, just try to resolve it with your servicer first, because ultimately that's your point of contact for the debt. If you cannot get anywhere with them, then I would encourage you to use your options, complain where appropriate, and see what happens. All right, as for Maryland Student Loan Ombudsman, if you're currently in repayment, you have a complaint about your student loan servicer, you can visit the Maryland Student Loan Ombudsman's website online and file a complaint. And the link there is given for the Department of Labor. Also, Maryland has a borrower's Bill of Rights. You can view that Bill of Rights online to learn about the protections to which Maryland borrowers are entitled and the obligations of student loan servicers. And again, the link there is to the Department of Labor's website where you can find the Student Loan Ombudsman page. All right, so that does it for the questions that were submitted from our community. I thank you for joining me this evening, and there is so much going on. So I'm expecting to see many more questions, and you know, as there are, as the major developments unfold, I will make sure that I'm taking it all in and sending those messages out to the people who have subscribed to our mailing list. Speaking of which, if you'd like to keep up with the Maryland Center for Collegiate Financial Wellness, you can go to our website, which is mccfw.org. You can join our mailing list there by checking out the contact page. You can also connect with us on social media. We are at the McFew, that's THEMCCFW on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I'm going to do a quick check to see if we have any comments. All right, I don't see any on Facebook. And the Q&A is still empty. So I am going to stick around for a couple of minutes, just in case any questions arise. And I'm going to stop sharing for the moment. Okay. And we'll just hang out and see if any questions come up before we hit the 8 o'clock hour. I actually had some other questions that came in earlier. Let's see. One of them is about consolidating loans. And the question was from a person who had received a consolidation confirmation letter. And the letter only included estimates for the balance-driven repayment plans, not the income-driven repayment plans, even though the borrower completed an income-driven repayment plan request inside of the consolidation application. So the borrower was wondering why those income-driven repayment options had not been updated. And to tell you truly, I don't know. Just to step back a little bit and look at the consolidation application. When you consolidate, The first thing that you have to do is verify the loans that you want to consolidate. And then you have to select a servicer. You also have to select whether you want a grace period or you want the application to be processed right away. After you get through those questions, the next section is going to be about repayment plans. So you're going to be asked to estimate your adjusted gross income. You'll also be asked about your family size and tax filing status. Once you enter that information, you'll be given estimates of what repayment will look like under the income-driven plans. That's income-based repayment, income contingent repayment, pay-as-you-earn, and revised pay-as-you-earn. The balance-driven section would be populated without you having to include that information about your household's finances, because the balance-driven plans are based solely upon the balances and not on the household characteristics like AGI and family size. So once you enter that information, you review the estimates, you are asked to select a repayment plan from a drop-down list. And in the next section, you were asked if you would like to transfer your income information in from the IRS. So they pull it from one of your more recent tax returns. In this situation, the borrower actually went through this process, went to the IRS, was able to successfully link the information from their tax return back into the consolidation application, and they selected a repayment plan. So we thought they were good to go. They had completed the income-driven repayment request inside of the consolidation application, and the consolidation is moving forward. So they received a letter saying, and this is a standard letter, you have 10 days to advise if you want to change anything about this loan or else it'll move forward. And another letter that had a grid, like a table, that had payments for the balance-driven plans only. All of the income-driven repayment plan boxes within that table were empty. And it was really strange because they completed the application for the income-driven repayment request. I'm not sure why that happened, but we actually went back in today and completed the IDR request again and didn't see any record of a prior application being submitted, because we had submitted it before inside of the consolidation application. So I'm not sure what happened with that, but just know that even if that does happen, you can go into studentaid.gov and you can complete the IDR request online. If you're unable to transfer your income information over from your tax return, then you have to fill out a paper application for the IDR request. But either way, access to both the online version and the paper version can be found at studentaid.gov. Again, that's at studentaid.gov. You can log in and complete that application. So with this particular borrower, we completed the application for the IDR request today online, and hopefully they'll receive some correspondence soon from their new servicer to say, based on what you've entered, here are your options for income-driven repayment plans, because this person is interested in public service loan forgiveness, and the income-driven repayment plans are the plans that qualify for PSLF. So we want to make sure that they're staying on track to reach that ultimate benefit of having the debt canceled tax-free after achieving 120 qualifying periods of repayment. All right, so I think that does it for questions. I don't see any on Facebook. I see none in the Q&A. I will take that to mean that I have answered every single question you have, or at least every question that you could come up with during this hour. So once again, thank you so much for joining me for this edition of Office Hours. Feel free to visit the center online at mccfw.org. Connect with us on social media at the MCCFW, and I will look forward to the next edition of Office Hours, which will be held in 2 weeks. That sets us up for November the 30th. It's 7 p.m. Eastern. You can register via Zoom to submit your questions, or you can submit your questions online through mcfew.org/contact, or you can just join us on Facebook Live and jump into the conversation by way of the chat. Okay, so take care. Thanks again, and be well until next time.